Regret and shame look similar on the surface, but they are psychologically opposite forces, and that one difference explains why an avoidant can hurt you, feel something about it later, and still not show up with the apology you deserve. Regret is a feeling about behavior. Shame is a feeling about identity. Regret says I did something wrong. Shame says I am wrong. And when a person lives more in shame than in regret, they don't move toward repair, they move toward hiding. They don't lean into the relationship, they retreat from the mirror. This matters because most people assume that if someone feels bad, they will make it right. That's how a secure nervous system works. A secure person can tolerate the discomfort of accountability. They can say, I messed up, without collapsing into self-hatred. They can face the impact they caused and still feel worthy of love. That's regret doing its healthy job. It signals a mistake and motivates change. Regret is painful, but it's useful. It points to a behavior that can be corrected, a conversation that can be had, a repair that can be made. Shame doesn't do that. Shame doesn't point to a mistake. It points to a verdict. Shame feels like a final sentence, not a fixable moment. And for an avoidant, whose whole survival system is built around control and emotional self-protection, shame is one of the most threatening emotions they can experience. Because shame makes them feel exposed. Shame makes them feel small. Shame makes them feel seen in a way they can't manage. And if they learned early that being seen leads to pain, they will do what their nervous system was trained to do: disappear, deflect, numb out, or act like nothing happened. This is why you can have a relationship with an avoidant where you know in your bones they felt something, and yet they still refuse to say the words you needed. You might even see small signs. They hover, they check your stories, they send a weak hey, they resurface weeks later like they're testing the air. That's not necessarily because they feel no regret. It's often because regret turned into shame, and shame turned into avoidance. Here's what happens internally. When you confront them, when you express pain, when you ask for accountability, the avoidant doesn't just hear your request. Their nervous system hears danger. They hear I'm being judged. They hear I'm failing. They hear I'm about to be exposed as the bad guy. And because shame feels like identity death, their brain reaches for protection. Protection can look like coldness. Protection can look like defensiveness. Protection can look like minimizing. It wasn't that serious. Protection can look like flipping the script. You're too sensitive. Protection can look like a sudden need for space. Anything to escape the moment where they might have to sit in the weight of what they did. That's why the avoidant can say strange things when you bring up something real. Not because they don't understand, but because the shame response hijacks them. They may focus on your tone instead of your message. They may attack your timing instead of the truth. They may say you're making problems, because if the problem becomes you, they don't have to face themselves. That is shame's favorite move. Outsource the discomfort. And this is why your heart gets trapped. Because you keep thinking if I just explain it better, they'll finally get it. But they already get it on some level. The problem isn't information, it's tolerance. They don't have the tolerance for the emotional exposure that accountability requires. So they run, they shut down, they disappear. And your mind interprets that disappearance as proof they don't care, when often it's proof they care but don't know how to carry the weight of being wrong without collapsing. Now listen closely, because this is where your power returns. Shame is not proof of love. Shame is proof of an unhealed relationship with responsibility. A person can feel ashamed and still not be safe for you. A person can feel guilty and still repeat the same behavior. A person can miss you and still refuse to grow. So the question is not, do they feel shame? The question is, can they turn shame into repair? Healthy regret says, I hurt you, and I want to make it right. Shame says, I feel awful, so I need to avoid the conversation that would expose me. Healthy regret leans toward honesty. Shame leans toward hiding. Healthy regret creates actions over time. Shame creates avoidance, excuses, and reset attempts. And this is why avoidants often prefer to return casually. Because casual returns don't force identity-level confrontation. A hey doesn't require them to say I was wrong. A meme doesn't require them to own impact. A like on your story doesn't require vulnerability. They can get relief without repair. They can feel less guilty without doing the hard work. And if you respond quickly, warmly, emotionally, you accidentally become the person who rescues them from their shame. You give them comfort without requiring accountability. You help them escape the mirror. But if your silence is steady, if your standard is calm, something powerful happens. You stop being the escape route. You become the boundary they have to respect. And then their shame has only two outcomes. Either it matures into accountability and consistent effort, or it keeps them hiding and they fade away. Either way, you get the truth without begging for it. Because the difference between regret and shame explains everything. Regret can build repair, but shame often builds avoidance. And once you see that, you stop chasing explanations and you start requiring behavior. They often act like they don't care at the exact moment they care the most, and that contradiction is what makes an avoidant dynamic feel so maddening. You're looking at their face, their tone, their silence, and you're thinking, if I mattered, you wouldn't be this cold. But avoidant psychology doesn't work like common sense love. Avoidant psychology is not built around expressing feelings, it's built around surviving feelings. So when emotion rises, when consequences appear, when your hurt becomes undeniable, they don't lean in like a secure partner would. They armor up, they go quiet, they act fine, they become distant, sometimes even indifferent, because indifference is the mask that keeps them from feeling exposed. This is where you have to stop reading their behavior as simple lack of love, and start reading it as emotional self-protection. Many avoidants learned early that closeness is risky. Maybe they grew up in an environment where emotions were ignored, mocked, punished, or used against them. Maybe they learned that needing people makes you weak. Maybe their caregivers were inconsistent, so they learned to rely on themselves. Whatever the origin, the result is the same. Their nervous system treats vulnerability like danger. So when they feel guilt or shame about hurting you, the feeling doesn't naturally turn into, I should apologize. It turns into, I need to get away from this feeling. And that's why they look unbothered. Because unbothered is not always peace. It's often distance. It's a psychological space they create, so they don't have to face the emotional weight of what they did. If they fully admit, I hurt you, they have to feel guilt. If they fully admit, I pushed you away, they have to feel fear. If they fully admit, I might lose you, they have to feel vulnerability. And vulnerability is the one room they avoid entering unless they feel completely in control. So instead they do what feels safer. They minimize. They deflect. They act casual. They pretend it wasn't that deep. They change the subject. They disappear. They might even joke. They might even seem annoyed that you're bringing up something serious. And from your side it feels insulting, because it's like they're stepping on your pain. But internally they're stepping away from their own shame. Here's the key. They often look calm because they're suppressing, not because they're okay. Suppression is not healing. It's a lid on a boiling pot. It's them forcing the feelings down so they can function. And many avoidants are experts at functioning while disconnected. They can work, socialize, smile, and still be emotionally numb. That numbness is their comfort zone. It's the place where they feel control. So when they hurt you, instead of processing the impact, they detach into numbness, because numbness feels safer than guilt. This is also why they can be warm one day and cold the next. Warmth happens when they feel safe, when the emotional stakes are low, when they feel they can choose closeness without being demanded to sustain it. Coldness happens when they feel pressure, when they feel expectation, when your feelings put a mirror in front of them. Your pain becomes a mirror that says your behavior mattered, and the avoidance nervous system often responds to mirrors by retreating. That's why you can see them behave like you meant nothing, right after you meant everything. It's not that your value changed overnight, it's that their tolerance for emotional exposure changed. When the relationship feels light, they can be present. When the relationship feels real, they become avoidant. And the more you try to make it real through conversations, definitions, and emotional honesty, the more their defenses activate. Now let's connect this to shame, because shame is what makes the I don't care act stronger. Shame threatens identity. Shame doesn't just say you made a mistake. Shame says you're the kind of person who hurts people. And most avoidants cannot tolerate seeing themselves that way. So they escape that identity threat by rewriting the story. They may convince themselves you were too emotional. They may convince themselves you were demanding. They may convince themselves you were the one creating problems. That story isn't about you, it's about them trying to survive their own discomfort. If they can make you the problem, they don't have to face being the problem. And this is why, when you look for empathy, you often get coldness. When you ask for accountability, you often get defensiveness. When you want a real apology, you often get silence or a casual message days later like nothing happened. That casualness is not proof they're over it. It's proof they're scared of the depth. But here's the twist that changes your healing. Their I don't care act is not a sign you should chase harder. It's a sign you should stop feeding the pattern. Because every time you chase, you give them a way to avoid themselves. They can focus on your reaction instead of their behavior. They can label you intense instead of facing their inconsistency. But when you step back calmly, you remove the distraction. You remove the performance. You remove the emotional tug-of-war. And now if they are going to face their shame, they have to do it without using you as an escape route. So yes, they can look unbothered while feeling something inside. But you can't build a future on what you suspect someone feels. You can only build on what they are willing to do. Because real care is not secret. Real care shows up as repair, accountability, and consistent effort. Fear makes them chase. Shame makes them hide. And understanding this one distinction will save you from misreading their behavior and giving your power away at the exact wrong moment. Because when you're dealing with an avoidant, their returns are not always proof of love. Often their returns are proof of a trigger, and the two biggest triggers are fear and shame, but they push the avoidant in opposite directions. Fear is activating. Fear creates movement. Fear makes them reach for reassurance, because fear is about losing access. Fear is the nervous system saying, wait, something important is slipping away. That's why avoidants often reappear when you pull back. The moment your energy changes, the moment you stop texting, the moment you stop chasing, the moment you become calm, their fear lights up, because your calm looks like finality. Your calm looks like you've accepted the loss. Your calm looks like you're no longer controlled by the bond. And for an avoidant, that can feel like rejection, even if you never rejected them. It feels like the situation is no longer in their hands. So fear makes them chase in small, controlled ways. They don't chase like a secure person, openly and vulnerably. They chase by testing. They chase by hovering. They chase by a casual hey, a random question, a like, a reaction, a just checking in. Why? Because they want to reduce uncertainty without fully exposing themselves. Fear makes them want proof they still matter, proof they still have access, proof they can still return if they choose. That's why they often show up right when you finally start healing. It's not always because they suddenly became ready for commitment. It's often because their nervous system felt the threat of losing control of the connection. Shame, on the other hand, is collapsing. Shame creates hiding. Shame makes them withdraw deeper, because shame is not about losing you. Shame is about being seen. Shame is the nervous system saying, if they see what I did, if they see who I am, I will be judged, rejected, humiliated. And because avoidants fear emotional exposure, shame can make them go ice cold. It can make them disappear. It can make them defensive, irritated, dismissive. It can make them act like you're the problem, because if they can attack your emotions, they can avoid feeling their own. This is why the avoidant can come close when you detach, but pull away when you confront. When you detach, fear activates and they reach. When you confront, shame activates and they hide. And if you don't know this, you will interpret their fear-driven reach as a sign that they finally love me, and you will interpret their shame-driven withdrawal as a sign that I did something wrong. But the truth is you didn't do something wrong. You triggered the two emotions they least know how to handle. Here's what it looks like in real life. You stop engaging. You stop reacting. You stop chasing. Suddenly they appear, softer than before, curious, friendly, nostalgic. That is fear. Fear wants access restored. Fear wants the loop closed. Fear wants the reassurance that you're still there. And if you respond immediately, emotionally, fully, you soothe the fear. Their system relaxes. The urgency fades. And because the reach was fear-driven, not commitment-driven, they often pull away again once the threat is gone. Then you try to talk about what happened. You try to bring the truth into the light. You ask for accountability. You mention the pain. You ask why they disappeared. And suddenly their tone changes. Suddenly they get cold. Suddenly they say you're making it a big deal. Suddenly they shut down or vanish. That is shame. Shame cannot tolerate the mirror. Shame hates being asked to name the harm, because naming the harm means owning the self that caused it. So they hide. And here is why this is such a trap. Fear brings them toward you. Shame pushes them away. That push-pull can make you feel like you're constantly one conversation away from fixing everything. When they fear losing you, they reach. When you ask for repair, they collapse. And you start thinking, if I just stay gentle enough, they'll stay. You start walking on eggshells. You start minimizing your pain to keep them close. You start accepting crumbs because crumbs feel better than silence. And slowly you become the person who carries the relationship emotionally, so they don't have to face themselves. But the real power is in recognizing what's happening without chasing it. If they reappear because fear is triggered, you don't treat that as proof of change. You treat it as information. You slow down. You observe consistency. You require clarity. You don't hand them full access just because they knocked. Because fear can make someone emotional for a moment, but only character can make someone steady over time. And if they hide because shame is triggered, you don't take that as a sign that your needs are wrong. You take it as a sign that they are not currently safe for accountability. Because a relationship cannot be built on a person who collapses every time truth is required. If someone cannot face impact, they cannot build intimacy. And if they cannot build intimacy, they will keep repeating the cycle. Fear makes them chase because they don't want to lose comfort. Shame makes them hide because they don't want to face consequences. And your job is not to manage their fear or soothe their shame. Your job is to hold standards so strong that whether they chase or hide, you stay rooted in what you deserve: clarity, consistency, and respect. The confusing behavior isn't random, it's emotional armor, and once you see it as armor instead of mystery, you stop taking it personally, and you stop chasing the wrong explanation. Because many people think avoidants are inconsistent because they're confused about you, but often they're inconsistent because they're trying to regulate themselves. The warmth and the coldness are not two different truths, they're two different defense settings. One setting turns on when they want connection, the other turns on when connection starts feeling dangerous. Emotional armor is what a person wears when they don't feel safe being seen. And avoidants are experts at wearing it, because it helps them survive intimacy without surrendering control. That's why you can experience a night of closeness that feels deep, real, almost sacred, and then wake up to a completely different person. They don't text, they don't follow up, they act busy, they act distant, they act like the night didn't mean what it clearly meant. That shift isn't always because the connection was fake, it's often because the connection was real enough to trigger their fear. For an avoidant, intimacy equals exposure, exposure equals risk, risk equals discomfort. So when they feel you getting close, their system tries to protect them from that discomfort by creating distance, and distance is their armor. Distance is the shield that makes them feel safe again. The problem is you experience that shield as rejection. You experience that shield as I'm not valued, but internally it's I feel too seen, I need space to breathe. Now armor has patterns. It doesn't show up randomly. It shows up when certain triggers are present. One trigger is emotional intensity. If you express pain, ask for clarity, or want accountability, that's when the armor goes on. Another trigger is commitment. If the relationship starts moving toward definition, the armor goes on. Another trigger is vulnerability. If they are asked to admit they miss you, admit they were wrong, admit they care, the armor goes on. The armor is their way of staying in control of their emotional exposure. That's why the cycle is so common. Warm then cold, close then distant, affectionate then silent. When they feel safe, they can be charming, they can be present, they can be playful, they can even be intensely loving, because in those moments they feel in control. But once the emotional stakes rise, once you start wanting consistency, once you start expecting the warmth to mean something stable, their system panics and their armor returns. And this is where the viewer gets trapped, because the armor often looks like confidence. It looks like they don't care. It looks like they're strong. It looks like they're not affected. But armor is not strength. Armor is protection. It's a wall. And walls can look solid even when they're built from fear. One of the most painful armor moves is cold after warm, because it makes you question your reality. You think, did I imagine the connection? Was it real? Did I do something wrong? That's why avoidant armor is so destabilizing. It creates emotional whiplash. And emotional whiplash creates obsession, because your mind tries to solve the contradiction. You start analyzing the timing. You start replaying the conversation. You start searching for the moment you ruined it. But the truth is you didn't ruin it. The truth is closeness activated their defense. Another armor move is distance after intimacy. They open up, they share, they hold you, they talk about meaningful things, and then suddenly they're gone. This isn't always manipulation. Sometimes it's a post-intimacy hangover. They feel vulnerable, and their system tries to restore control by pulling away. They need distance to calm their nervous system, so they create it, but they rarely communicate it directly, because direct communication would require emotional maturity, so they vanish instead. Another armor move is breadcrumbs, instead of apologies. A real apology requires them to face impact. Facing impact triggers shame. Shame triggers armor. So instead of apologizing, they do something safer. They test. A hey, a like, a random message, something that checks access without acknowledging harm. It's a way of approaching you without taking off the armor. And the biggest mistake you can make is confusing armor with truth. When they are cold, you think the relationship is dead. When they are warm, you think it's alive. But both phases can exist in the same person, because the warmth is desire and the cold is defense. If you keep riding that roller coaster, you will keep losing yourself trying to earn a stable version of someone who refuses to build one. So what do you do with this understanding? You stop chasing the warm moments as proof. You stop treating the cold moments as a personal verdict. You start measuring what matters: consistency over time, accountability under pressure, clarity when it's uncomfortable. Because anyone can be warm when they feel safe. The real question is, can they stay present when emotions rise? Can they communicate instead of disappear? Can they repair instead of reset? Emotional armor is not random. It's a pattern of protection. And once you see it, you stop trying to break through the wall with more love. You start requiring the person to choose whether they'll take the armor off and build something real, or keep hiding behind it and lose you. Breadcrumbs are relief, not repair. And if you learn this deeply, it will protect you from one of the most common emotional traps in avoidant dynamics, mistaking a tiny reach out for a real return. Because when you've been starving for accountability, even a crumb feels like a feast. A hey feels like hope. A like on your story feels like interest. A random question feels like an opening. and your nervous system, which has been carrying uncertainty for too long, wants to believe, this is it. This is the moment they finally realized. This is the apology I've been waiting for. But most breadcrumbs are not a bridge back to love. They are a quick way to soothe discomfort and escape shame without doing the work of repair. A breadcrumb is small by design. It's low risk, it's vague, it's casual. It allows them to make contact while keeping their ego protected. If you respond warmly, quickly, emotionally, they get what they came for, reassurance. They get proof that you're still open. They get proof they still matter. They get proof they still have access to your heart. And once they get that proof, the anxious energy that pushed them to reach out often disappears. Because the reach out wasn't powered by commitment, it was powered by tension. The tension was, what if I lose them? When you reply, the tension fades, so the urgency fades too. That's why breadcrumbs feel like a spark and then suddenly go cold again. You reply, you're relieved, you're open, you're hopeful. And then, nothing. Or they respond slowly. Or they keep it surface level. Or they vanish. And you're left asking, why would you come back just to disappear? Because they didn't come back to rebuild. They came back to regulate. They needed a hit of relief. They needed to know you were still there. They needed to quiet the fear and shame without stepping into accountability. This is especially true when shame is present. Remember, shame makes avoidance hide. Shame makes them fear being seen as the bad guy. Shame makes them fear your anger, your disappointment, your boundaries. So instead of coming with a direct apology, they come sideways. They act casual to avoid looking guilty. They try to restart the connection without addressing what happened. They want the comfort of closeness without the pain of responsibility. And if you take the bait, you unintentionally rescue them from the very consequences that could have matured them. That's why I call breadcrumbs relief. Because they relieve their discomfort, but they do not repair your trust. Trust is not rebuilt by contact. Trust is rebuilt by accountability plus consistency over time. A breadcrumb offers neither. It offers a moment of connection, but it avoids the conversation that would actually heal the wound. It bypasses the part where they say, I hurt you, and you get to say, yes, you did. It bypasses the part where they take ownership without excuses. It bypasses the part where they show a new pattern, not just a new message. Repair has weight. Repair is not scared of the past. Repair doesn't ask you to pretend. Repair doesn't rush you into comfort. Repair is willing to sit in discomfort to rebuild safety. It sounds like, I've been thinking about how I treated you. I know I disappeared. I know I hurt you. I want to understand what that did to you. I want to do better. And then it follows with actions that match. Repair is consistent communication. Repair is clarity. Repair is respect for your boundaries. Repair is the willingness to earn back access instead of assuming it. A breadcrumb, on the other hand, is allergic to depth. It gets annoyed when you bring up the past. It changes the subject. It keeps things light. It keeps you guessing. It tries to make you feel like you're ruining the vibe if you ask for accountability. And that is your sign. Because if someone truly wants to repair, they won't be offended by your need for safety.